The bank recorded the transaction at 2:47 a.m. A large transfer, signed by the person who used to share my bed. While she traveled in silence, our bank account was drained without warning. It wasn't just the inheritance money that disappeared. It was the trust, the name, the history. And by the time the truth came out, it was too late for apologies. Justice was already on its way. My name is Thomas Aldridge. I'm 44 years old, a structural engineer living in Boise, Idaho. I've spent years inspecting public infrastructure, bridges, overpasses, power plants. It's the kind of work that demands precision, patience, and a healthy dose of skepticism. Maybe that's why I never thought I was the type to be easily fooled. At least, that's what I believed. At home, my wife Laura kept everything spotless. Hot coffee in the morning, polite laughs at family dinners, and that sensible aura even my brothers admired. It all seemed perfectly in place, except it wasn't. I just didn't know it yet. She started pushing for little things and the kind of stuff a busy man lets slide. Swapping her car for something that better matched her image. Taking trips with friends to relax, always to the same places. She said she needed to reconnect with her soul, to find herself. That kind of talk. And me. I'm not the type to forbid anything, least of all my wife. So I paid, stayed quiet, and kept working. The bank account was ours after all. Our family was doing fine. And if she wanted more freedom, who was I to say no? But little by little, her freedom started coming with a kind of distance I never asked for. Our dinners changed, the conversations faded, and her laughs became rehearsed. That's when it hit me. The Laura who came back from those retreats wasn't the same one who left. I'm not talking about different clothes or new habits. I mean her eyes. Eyes that no longer owed anything to anyone, not even to me. And yet, she made sure to keep up appearances, like she still needed me inside the illusion. At work, nothing changed. I'd wake up early, file reports, sign off on inspections, and stay on top of the paperwork. But my mind was increasingly consumed by what was missing. It wasn't just her absence. It was the absence of connection, of truth, of reciprocity. Some mornings, I'd sit at the breakfast table and feel like all that was left was decoration. The woman who shared my house felt like she was living on a different frequency, one I couldn't tune into anymore. One day, she handed me a fancy envelope, ribbon and all. I thought it was a peace offering, but it was an invitation. Another retreat. Except this one came with a clear price. I'd stay home to handle the chores, her sick mother, and the dog, while she took care of her essence in Colorado. I smiled, nodded, and said, "Have a great trip." But inside, something cracked. Like a support beam that's still standing, but you just know, it's not going to hold for much longer. Each time she left, there was less of her coming back. Not just physically, but emotionally. She returned like someone stopping by, picking up clothes, updating her alibis. And me? I pretended not to notice, pretended there was still something worth saving. But a man doesn't need to shout to feel pain. He doesn't have to suffer in public to carry the weight of betrayal in silence. I was starting to realize something was seriously wrong. I just didn't know how wrong yet. The small signs started coming together like pieces of a puzzle someone abandoned halfway. One day, I found 2 spa receipts, with swapped names, none of them hers. Another day, a notification popped up on her phone, and she stared at me 2 seconds too long. When I asked about it, she said, "It's just the retreat group." But you know when an answer doesn't stick? Yeah, that. And that's where the real problem begins. It's not what someone says, it's how their body reacts when they lie. The shallow breathing, the quick blinking, the rush to change the subject. That wasn't love anymore, it was an act. And the worst part? On the outside, no one could see it. Her family still treated me like the ideal son-in-law. Our friends still called us the power couple. But inside, something was already whispering to me. "You're gonna need strength, Thomas. A lot of it." And the truth is, at that moment, I had no idea just how deep the revenge ran. I couldn't imagine that the very account I'd built with care would be used against me by the person sleeping beside me. But what hurt the most was how she did it all like it was nothing, like justice would never come knocking at her door. I was out on a routine inspection of a rural bridge when I got the call from the bank. At first I thought it was some kind of mistake, maybe a duplicate charge on my card, but the rep, overly polite, informed me that our joint account had been closed at the express request of the account holder. I froze. Told him I was the account holder too. He repeated, "The signature is already in the system, sir." His voice hit like a stamp being slammed into my head. And right there, in the middle of nowhere, hard hat still on, radio clipped to my chest, it sank in. This wasn't a mistake. It was a clean break, cold, calculated, official. I went home without saying a word, not even to myself. I just sat in the armchair, pulled off my boots, and stared at the envelope on the table. It was the same kind she used to leave me sweet notes in when we were first married. Inside it, a message. 4 dry lines. "Thomas, I'm taking some time for myself. Don't try to find me. The financial matters have been settled. Laura." No tears, no apologies, not even a hint of affection, just that cold, bureaucratic tone, like signing off on a resignation letter. But this wasn't a job I was losing. This was my family. That same day, I found out she had transferred every last dollar from the inheritance I got from my father a few months earlier. Money we had kept separate, out of respect for his legacy. It was my one financial tie to a man who spent his life teaching me integrity, and died believing I'd carry that forward. And now, that tie was gone, torn away by the woman I married, with a level of coldness that hurt more than any physical betrayal ever could. I tried to understand. I searched old emails, messages, anything that could explain that kind of abandonment, but there was no anger, no goodbye, just silence. And when you love someone, silence cuts deeper than any argument. There was no yelling, no fight, no dramatic exit. She simply left and took everything with her like our entire story had been nothing more than a crumpled-up page tossed in the trash. Some friends suggested maybe she had a breakdown. Maybe she snapped. But people don't plan lawyer meetings, hotel reservations, and bank transfers when they snap. That wasn't impulse. It was strategy. And I didn't see it until it was far too late. I'd eaten off a dirty plate, slept in a poisoned bed, and still I didn't shout. I just sat there staring at the ceiling for 2 straight hours, breathing slow, like each breath was an attempt to piece together what little dignity I had left. That night I opened my laptop and saw a hotel reservation under her name, paid with my card, tied to our joint account, a future date, a spa in Colorado. It was the same soul-searching trip she'd mentioned, but now I knew who she'd be going with. I didn't need to see pictures. The name on the charge told me everything. I just read it, closed the laptop, and went to bed. The same bed where she had laid beside me for years, and for months, had lied right against my chest. Still, I didn't cry. Not that night. Men like me, we try to make sense of things, try to find reason in disrespect. But some betrayals defy logic. Some feel like a blade with no edge. You don't see the cut, but the bleeding's real. And still, you get up the next morning, make the coffee, adjust your watch, and head to work. Because life doesn't pause to offer sympathy. The next morning I shaved, got a haircut, wore my best shirt. It wasn't about appearances. It was about holding on to something. Dignity. If she wanted to disappear, that was her choice. But I was still standing. Or at least I looked like I was. What she didn't know, what no one knew, was that letter, that blow, that injustice. It wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The first mark in a line I was about to draw, calmly, clearly, and without warning. The first instinct was to do what anyone would, call her, demand answers, threaten legal action. But I didn't do any of that. Silence speaks louder than shouting, and I needed to think. Sit with myself, look at the wreckage, and decide where to step next. So I took a deep breath, pulled an old notebook from the drawer, and started writing. Line by line, Everything that had happened over the past 6 months. Dates, names, purchases, cryptic messages, comings and goings. When I finished, it felt like I'd swept the floor of my mind. Next, I organized a folder with just the financial documents, bank statements, emails from the inheritance attorney, screenshots of transactions she'd made at times when she claimed to be asleep. I wasn't in a rush. I had a method. Each new piece of information filled a gap that had once seemed confusing. And the more I put the puzzle together, the clearer the image became of who she had turned into. She wasn't a wife in crisis. She was an opportunist with access. I scheduled a meeting with my lawyer. I didn't say it was urgent. I went to his office, sat down calmly, and laid it all out. He listened, took notes, and at the end, he simply said, "We'll act, but without rushing." It was the best thing I'd heard in weeks, because it gave me back control. And believe me, for someone betrayed inside his own home, there's nothing more powerful than reclaiming the right to act with clarity. Meanwhile, at work, no one knew a thing. I kept my composure, met deadlines, led inspections. The only difference was that now I was twice as focused on the structures I was assessing and on the invisible structure my personal life was becoming. My emotional resignation from the marriage had made me more centered, not colder, just more selective. I had learned to listen to what people don't say. I also started reviewing everything related to the inheritance, old documents from my father, clauses, notary records, emails exchanged with his accountant. That's when I discovered a loophole. A portion of that money was under my name only and couldn't legally be moved without my explicit consent. It wasn't much, but it was a thread, and a thread, when pulled just right, can unravel false families and expose the backstage of injustice. I created a new email account, personal, clean, untraceable. With it, I made discreet contacts, an asset consultant, a friend in the banking sector, a private investigator. I wasn't asking for anything illegal. I just wanted to know if there had been more transactions in her name. And what came back made me stop for a moment. In addition to the spa bookings, there were flight purchases for 2 names, one male, same last name, repeated, the lover, who already had an additional card on our bank account. That could have broken me, but it did the opposite. It focused me, gave a clear purpose to my silent revenge. But understand, this wasn't payback with rage. It was a return, a strategic response to the calculated betrayal she had orchestrated so carefully. And the more evidence I gathered, the more she revealed, without realizing it, who she truly was. Each receipt was a voiceless confession. Each screenshot, a sentence she'd never have the guts to say out loud. I had 2 options: confront her or keep collecting. And I chose the latter, because revenge without justice is just noise. I wanted my plan to be bulletproof, that by the time she realized it, it'd be too late. And most importantly, that it wouldn't cost me the peace I was working so hard to rebuild. My response would come with a signature, a stamp, and silence. It was just an ordinary afternoon, somewhere between one inspection and the next, when the phone rang. It was the private investigator I'd hired, always straight to the point. "Thomas, you need to go through this carefully." What he sent me wasn't just a report. It was a dossier. Inside were cross-referenced financial transactions between my wife, the so-called lover, and a third name, a tax consultant who, guess what, had worked with my father's company before the inheritance was released. The same company that handled the transfer paperwork. This wasn't a mistake. It was a network, a meticulous plan. From that moment on, everything changed. This wasn't just a marital betrayal. It was financial, legal, and deliberate. They knew exactly what they were doing. The con wasn't some impulsive act of passion. It had been planned weeks in advance, involving hidden clauses, staggered transactions, and even the creation of an offshore account tied to a so-called spiritual foundation that my wife now claimed to represent as an ambassador. Spirituality, retreat, self-discovery, all a cover. What she really did was use the pain of my grief as an opening to rob me. I went back and combed through old emails, That's when I found a detail. The lover's name, now confirmed as a co-conspirator, showed up on a tax consulting invoice, paid with the same card we used for household expenses. The date? 2 months before my father passed away. In other words, the plan was already in motion before the inheritance ever hit the account. This wasn't a runaway romance. It was a calculated dismantling of my financial and emotional foundation, and I had no idea how much deeper it would go. When my lawyer reviewed the documents, he let out a sigh and said, "You weren't just betrayed, you were swallowed by a conspiracy." He contacted a law firm in New York that specializes in financial fraud between spouses and business partners. Their tone was blunt. This isn't just about marriage, this is criminal justice. And for the first time since this all began, I saw a path. One that didn't involve shouting or emotional fights, but protocols, forensic audits, and courtrooms. That's when we discovered the lover was an informal partner in a shell company registered under someone else's name, which had received a direct transfer from the spiritual foundation. The money had left our joint account, been laundered through a so-called institutional donation, and returned as payment for fake services. This wasn't just fraud against me, it was money laundering, and the justice system doesn't take that lightly. Right then I realized the story had shifted levels. I wasn't looking at infidelity anymore. I was staring down a crime. My reaction in that moment was complex. On one hand, the weight of the discovery was suffocating. On the other, outrage began to turn into strength. That quiet revenge I'd been carefully shaping now had undeniable legitimacy. This wasn't just for me. It was for my father, for the respect tied to everything he built, for the truth, and for every man who's ever been treated like a fool for trusting too much. I gathered all the documents, sorted them by date, and built a timeline of her every step. It was almost ironic. The same precision I used for bridge safety inspections was now being applied to expose a wife who had dug every hole beneath me with the cold precision of a reverse engineer. The difference was, I wasn't going to collapse. On the contrary, I was going to rebuild, only this time on solid ground, and with justice. That's when I understood something most people don't. Sometimes injustice doesn't destroy you. It clears the fog. It wakes you up. And once you're awake, you realize there are more people involved, more pieces on the board, more truths hidden behind the curtain. And all you need to do is take the right steps in the right order. The rage faded. What remained was strategy, and what came next would require silence, precision, and a razor-sharp timeline. Because the counterattack was about to begin, and it would be carried out with the same cold calculation she used to try to erase me. The first step was to legally freeze the foundation's assets. My lawyer filed for an injunction based on clear evidence of asset diversion and money laundering. When the court granted the request, the freeze was immediate and silent. They didn't know. Not yet. At that moment, the bank account tied to the so-called spiritual entity was locked. And with it, all transfers to the lover and his associates came to a halt. Within 72 hours, what had once looked like a benevolent financial flow became proof of bad faith. Right after that, we did something that takes courage. We officially notified the bank that had managed the inheritance transactions. That meant putting my wife's name directly at the center of the investigation. It was that or accepting the theft as a marital disagreement, and I was no longer that passive man. I wanted justice, not revenge driven by rage. Justice backed by documents. The bank cooperated. They released records confirming her direct involvement in suspicious activity, including the creation of a shadow account just days before my father's death. With the evidence in hand, the next move was to alert the state prosecutor's office. The New York legal team handled everything. What started as a private complaint became part of a formal investigation. Within 2 months, an inquiry was underway, with all 3 suspects officially named. And that's when the game truly shifted. It turned out the lover had outstanding tax issues, which gave the prosecution the perfect excuse to launch a search warrant. It wasn't some Hollywood scene, but it was powerful. Late one afternoon, while I was organizing reports at the office, I got the message. Search warrant executed. Documents seized. Attached was a photo. Her car parked in front of the foundation, surrounded by 2 official vehicles. Justice arriving without warning. Cold, clean, and final. I didn't have to raise my voice. I didn't need a press conference. All I did was take a deep breath. For the first time in months, the weight on my back wasn't mine alone. Now the system, the law, and consequences were involved. A few days later, the court ordered the seizure of personal assets belonging to her, the lover, and the company involved, including properties and investments. A judge issued a preliminary opinion indicating strong evidence of fraud in a family context. When I read that ruling, I didn't tear up, but what I felt ran deeper. It was as if my father, in some way, had been heard. As if that inheritance wasn't just about money. It was symbolic, and I had defended it. She tried reaching out, of course, first through a cold email, then through a mutual friend's message. All with the same tone. It was a misunderstanding. Let's talk. But there was nothing left to say. Not after everything. The only reply I sent came through a notary, a formal notice of contested divorce, citing attempted qualified asset misappropriation. She signed it days later. Not a word. And the most curious part? There was no scandal, no headlines, no public drama. Just court proceedings, paperwork, signatures, stamps. A silent revenge that reached every piece of what she tried to destroy. No audience. No emotional outbursts. Just truth, laid bare in black and white, in a courtroom. After the initial hearing, I sat in my car for a few minutes staring at the steering wheel. It wasn't happiness, it was relief. The certainty that when justice comes, it doesn't need to be loud, it just needs to be firm. And in this case, it was. She tried to erase my legacy, and now, she was the one having to explain every last cent. The process moved quickly. The evidence was solid, the timeline well documented, and the lack of any plausible defense on her side only helped. The preliminary ruling was upheld. Full asset freeze, complete separation of finances, and a ban on any joint transactions until the final judgment. When the court officer delivered the summons directly to her mother's house, I knew the cycle had closed. My wife was no longer mine, and the woman she had become didn't even deserve my resentment. She tried, sent an email saying things got out of hand, that she was influenced by the wrong people. But when someone betrays you, sabotages you, and then follows it up with sad emojis, that's not remorse. That's manipulation wrapped in fake vulnerability. I didn't reply, not with words. My only response was forwarding the message to my lawyer with the subject line, "Add to file." The revenge was complete. But more than that, justice was in motion. I didn't need to scream or shame anyone online. Life was taking care of that, with interest. Legally, there was nothing left she could contest. And yet, I got one final gesture, a handwritten letter, folded in 4 with a familiar scent in small handwriting. She wrote about beautiful memories, about everything we built together, and about the pain of losing you. But here's the thing. She didn't lose me. She lost access. To my trust, to my name, to my bank account, to my dignity. And nothing she could write would ever piece back together a vase she so willingly shattered. I kept the letter for a while, not out of nostalgia, but as a record. A reminder of what happens when you put too much faith in someone who doesn't deserve it. Because in the end, family isn't about who shares a roof with you. It's about who acts like family when no one's watching. And she, when she thought no one was watching, betrayed me the most. Not physically, but emotionally, legally, morally. And that's why the break had to be complete and final. She called me one last time. I didn't answer. Then she texted, "Can we talk?" I simply typed, "No," and blocked her. Not out of anger, out of respect. Respect for everything I was rebuilding. Because sometimes silence is the fairest answer someone can receive after causing so much damage. There's no reunion, no reconciliation, when someone has dug an abyss with their own hands. And look, this isn't about pride. It's about boundaries, the kind of boundary you only learn through pain. I had to go through all of this to finally understand that someone who loves you doesn't drain you. Someone who loves you doesn't use you as a bridge to somewhere else. And if they do, they have to face the consequences. Justice was served. And even if it takes time to hurt her, the bill always comes due. It always does. Some friends said, "You were too cold." But those same friends weren't there when I uncovered every detail, when I spent sleepless nights trying to figure out where I went wrong. No, I wasn't cold. I was fair to myself, to the man who tried to save the marriage, who accepted silence, accepted distance, tolerated disrespect. She was the cold one. My response was clean, without scandal, just a signature and a full stop. And when the divorce was finally finalized, I didn't celebrate. I just breathed, deeply, like someone who finally understands that endings aren't failures, they're freedom, and that some cuts, no matter how painful, are the only way to stop a wound from festering. And I chose to heal. Today I live in a smaller house, in a different neighborhood in Boise. Nothing fancy, but it has the right light coming through the windows and the kind of quiet I've learned to value. I've gone back to drinking coffee without rushing. I've gone back to cooking. I've gone back to talking to myself, without having to lie that everything's fine. Life now is light. My days start early with a walk and the radio on, and end with a good book. Sometimes I miss something, but not her. I miss myself, the man I was before all of this. And I'm slowly finding him again, patiently. At work, I turned down a promotion. I chose to keep my technical role and focus on smaller projects. Sometimes a step back is the only way to regain control. The team respects me, not just for my years on the job, but for my calm. No one knows the details, and I prefer it that way. The betrayal, the revenge, the justice, all of that belongs to a previous chapter. The present is simple, and for the first time in a long while, it's real. The other day, I got a message from one of the lawyers on the case. He said that thanks to my situation, their firm was able to develop a preventive protocol to help protect other family inheritances. That moved me, because it made me realize that, even unintentionally, my pain became a model to help prevent new ones. Family, at the end of the day, is about protection. And even though I was betrayed by someone who should have protected me, now I'm the one protecting what's left. With clarity. There are days when I catch myself reviewing the case files, not out of resentment, out of gratitude, because every signature, every bank statement, every court notice was a brick in my reconstruction. It wasn't the blows that defined me. It was what I did with them. And what I did was refuse to shrink. I chose not to sink with it. I chose to stop, to breathe, and to let justice, not anger, drive me. Sometimes I get letters with no return address, nothing threatening, just empty attempts at contact. I tear them all up. The woman I was married to is now just a name in a legal file, and nothing more. Whatever love once existed was buried with the same coldness she used to sign her exit. There's no fresh start with someone who never intended to stay. Today, my time is sacred. My boundaries are clear, and my peace has no more cracks. If you asked me whether it still hurts, I'd say yes. But it's a different kind of pain. It hurts like an old scar. It teaches without wounding. It hurts like a costly lesson you never forget, but also never repeat. And to me, that's maturity. I didn't get everything back, but I got myself. And in the end, that's what was at stake the whole time. I've kept my circle small, people with firm words, honest eyes, and comfortable silences. I don't need parties, praise, or validation anymore. I need peace, and, ironically, it was after the worst betrayal of my life that I discovered the best version of myself. The version that doesn't apologize for setting boundaries, that doesn't bargain for respect, and that understands real justice doesn't always come from a courtroom. Sometimes it comes from rebuilding. Sometimes someone asks me if I'd fall in love again. And to be honest, I don't know. What I do know is that I'm not in a rush. Love to me is no longer a promise. It's a practice. I'm not impressed by pretty words, public displays, or smiling couple photos. What matters now is what someone does when no one's watching, because it was in the shadows that I was wounded, and it's there I now see most clearly. And if one day someone crosses my path again, they'll have to come with truth, because this man no longer accepts sweet voices hiding half-truths. He only accepts what's whole. In the end, it wasn't the loss of the money that left the biggest mark. It was the coldness. The way someone who once claimed to love me managed to hide so much for so long, with such calm. We expect betrayal to come with shouting, but sometimes it comes with silence, with envelopes, with clauses. And that kind of pain cuts differently. What rebuilt me wasn't revenge. It was the choice not to let her define me. I survived an attempt to erase my story, and in place of pain, I wrote a new beginning. If you've made it this far, thank you. Truly. Maybe this story touched something you've lived through, or something you're still facing. Maybe you know someone who's been through something similar. If you feel like it, share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us what hurt you, what set you free, or what you'd do differently. That's what this space is for, so we can stop carrying certain pains in silence. Sometimes just saying it out loud is the first step toward healing, and trust me, someone out there will feel less alone because of it. If stories like this speak to you, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Every week, I share real, deep, and transformative stories, where justice shows up, even when everything seemed lost. This isn't about drama, it's about truth, about turning points, about finding peace after the storm. And who knows, maybe somewhere in these stories you'll find the strength you've been quietly searching for.